Ladies and gentlemen, elected representatives, Madam Ambassador, dear members of the audience. The Commissioner has already said a lot, and he mentioned many aspects of today's debate. We chose the date of 2029 to ask the question, which type of EU do we want, and which type of EU are we headed to? We decided to select two main topics. So first, there is the Green Deal with the 55% CO2 reduction emissions by 2030. So this would be just 1 year after the year we selected, 2029. So it raises the question about the implementation of what was decided during this mandate with the industrial, economic, and social implications. And then the second major date is 2030, which is not official, but which was announced by the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, for the project Commissioner Schmidt just mentioned. And when it comes to the shorter term, our panelists will be talking about this more in detail. The international environment is challenging, the economic environment as well. So this is the discussion we would like to have this evening. We'll be having a debate with our members of the panel, and then we'll be having an exchange with you, ladies and gentlemen, in just under an hour. So I will now, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Maurice from the Robert Schuman Foundation, and my co-moderator Hervé Moritz, who will be introducing our members of the panel. Thank you very much. So tonight, to discuss these challenges, we have the honor to welcome a very large panel, which I'll be introducing. First of all, we have Hélène Boulanger. You are the president of the University of Lorraine. The University of Lorraine is a major European university. It's part of a European alliance called Eureka Pro. And you will be talking about this European cooperation you've started at the level of the University of Lorraine. We would also like to wish a warm welcome to Eva Maydell. You are an MEP, part of the EPP. You are a president of the International European Movement, and you also work for the Commission on Industrial and Energy Issues, and we'll be talking about these issues later. Then we have Karl-Heinz Lambertz. You are a former member of the Committee of the Regions. You are a member of the Socialist Party. You were also president of the German-speaking community of Belgium. And you will perhaps be presenting what are the various challenges for the regions and the cohesion policy, especially when it comes to the enlargement we talked about earlier on. Then we have Nienaß. You are also an MEP, you're a part of the Greens, and you work in the same committee as Eva Maydell on energy and industrial issues. And then we have our next guest, European parliamentary, Mr. Charles Goerens. You're a MEP, part of Renew. As we said during our introduction, this debate will be taking place in French and in English, and there will be a Q&A session at the end. So, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to prepare your question to contribute to the debate. So I will now give the floor
to Eva Maydell, because you will have to leave first at 7:30. The first question is quite general. You will answer as you want. It's what are the main challenges? What is at stake for the EU in the coming years until 2029? From your point of view politically, from your point of view as member of different committees where you sit in the Parliament and as head of the European movement as well. So how would you frame the discussion for tonight?
Thank you very much, first of all, to the Grand Duchy for having me, for the kind invitation, and also to Anne Sander for having me join you tonight on such an important occasion. it's true, I would need to leave a couple of minutes early, but it was important for me to nevertheless accept the invite and join this distinguished panel. To your question, perhaps 3 points. The first one that I believe would be very pressing to us as Europeans, and I can see it as a big challenge, is how we are gonna shake the economy out of stagnation. How are we gonna put it back on the path of growth? How do we see our long-term strategy when it comes to competitiveness and innovation? And how do we make sure that we better regulate in our agenda? The second point to me will be linked to, out of this, what I've just mentioned, how do we not miss the real big picture that is out there globally? In a way, no man is an island, and we need to understand that the European strategy, be it tech strategy, be it a green strategy, being security or on skills, that we are able to see it from a geopolitical perspective and how Europe is actually positioning itself in that domain. And thirdly, very importantly, having in mind the multiple elections that are going to be happening in the next year, I think we need to give answers to Europeans about the growing trends of populism, of anti-democratic narrative. We, in this regard, would need to look towards bolder leadership, more energized leadership that is willing to take action. And this is why I think organizations such as the European movement in its respective member states, in its respective countries where national movements are positioned, like the European movement in France and the international branch here in Brussels, are well positioned to hold this conversation and talks with the citizens, bringing together civil society groups and various representatives and stakeholders from society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peut-être Hélène Boulanger, justement, sur cet enjeu de
Hélène Boulanger,
pouvoir,
on that very same question on how to integrate the citizens to that movement, to that quest. You are a member of a university that collaborates with different universities in Europe. Is there any relationship between those universities? How do you make sure that those universities work on questions such as research in Europe or economy, as was mentioned by Eva Meindl? How do you cooperate between universities? How do you involve students, pupils, and researchers? Just a few words on the context. Universities are places where we invent the world of tomorrow. So this is where we have ideas, this is where we carry out experiments. This is a place where there is always a lot of things that happen. What make universities work properly are actually different things. There is, of course, the academic dimension, which is directly related to democracy, but there is also mobility, intellectual and geographical mobility. We did not wait for Europe or the construction of Europe to bring mobility to universities. We have more students than before, but we have different schemes. We're working on projects, research projects. We're working on master's degree. We are working on joint programs of studies. We're working on innovation. We also have European alliances that are currently being built. So this whole process is a long-term one that aims at guaranteeing new ideas, innovation, which is fed into by the diversity of people that we can find within universities. Thank you. And how does that European alliance that you were referring to create that dynamic that makes it possible for you to imagine the worlds of tomorrow or Europe for 2029? That might differ a little bit. We used to have different kinds of cooperations which is still the case, but with the creation of European alliances, we're anchoring these cooperations in one perimeter that is very broad in terms of geography, but with partners that are very stable, with which we're going to work on the long term. For the very first time, we are not only working on training, research, innovation, we're also working for the construction of universities. We're putting in common our good practice in terms of governance, in terms of steering committees. We're going one step beyond, we're going way beyond what we were doing before. I am myself managing a university which is located at the border. We are a member of a transborder alliance, the Grand Est, and this is a very good asset in order to build that kind of cooperation. I'm going now to turn to Mr. Lambertz to complete our panorama of profiles in this panel, asking a very important question. In all those questions and issues that were mentioned by the Commissioner and by the Member of Parliament, what is the role, what do the regions do to cope with all those international challenges, and how can regions contribute in the achievement of priorities by 2029 in the next program of the European Commission, for instance? First of all, let me say that the European unification is one of the greatest achievements of the second half of the 20th century, as was said by one of the greatest US President, Obama. Unfortunately, the European Union is changing in terms of nature. It used to be a source of hope and now becomes a threat, an enemy, a foe. We're living through very difficult ages and moments. I have myself lived through different patches in my career. I knew that period when there was a lot of excitement. I was very happy when we enlarged the European Union, but I do see that Europe, as it works today, is not capable anymore to bring solutions, and it becomes, as was said, something that is at stake. Somewhere where no decision is being made, where things are getting lost in this triangle of Bermudas. And if we are going on that way, we're going to have to face a very difficult surprise on the 10th of June next year. And everything that we built in terms of cohesion, in terms of future, in terms of perspective, is about to be jeopardized. Europe is the second smallest continent with the highest density in terms of national density. And we do have borders that are scars of history. Robert Schuman was a good example of this. A grandfather who never went out of his village changed 3 times of citizenships and lived through 2 wars, which is, of course, not something that one desires. But what we see here is that we are undergoing pressure from the outside, and Europe's vision is by the day weaker. We are dwarfs when it comes to big challenges. Everything started with the war in Syria. What was the role of Europe to bring solutions? Nothing. The only thing that we did was welcoming refugees, and this is what places us on the verge of that populism, which is about to make everything explode and blow off. At the same time, we're living and seeing the increase and the rise of populist movement. And if we do not pay attention, we will have to face very difficult surprises. This is not to say that I do not believe in Europe, all the contrary. But we need another kind of Europe, a Europe that is able to decide, a Europe that needs to reform and needs to be self-aware. We're not talking only about Brussels, Luxembourg, or Strasbourg. We're talking about different regions and areas where hundreds of millions of people live, not only about politicians. If it was just Brussels or Strasbourg, it would be totally different. We know it. The objective is very clear. Through our action, through the efficiency of what we do, we need to show that the European unification has an added value in the stomach, in the head, and in the whole body of the citizens. And this is the big challenge that we're facing now. We need to mobilize. We need to talk about all those big challenges. They're different. Peace, demographic change, social equity, for instance. There is no one of those challenges that we can solve on our own. And as long as Europe is not able to make a decision, it's going to go from one defeat to another, and from one failure to another, and populists are going to collect all those votes. This is the big challenge that we're facing now. In order to get out of that situation, we need to reorganize. But this is a very difficult and a very sensitive situation because in the current situation, everyone can veto any other decision. We need to clean up our houses before enlarging Europe, because the worst promise that we can do is actually promising enlargement and membership to all countries. I'm just back from a stay in Slovakia and Ukraine. We're making big promises. Mrs. von der Leyen is promising to Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine to become candidates and become members of the European Union. But if we do not reorganize our house before enlarging, this is set to fail. I'm also a member of this big group thinking about the future after 2027, and I'm often saying we should have a low-level group and not only a high-level group, because we need to talk about the real questions. There is something at stake, the union, the cohesion of European Union. How can we ensure that cohesion without looking at what's around us? We have a lot of work to do. We need to go to people. We need to reach out to the citizens and convince them of the added value of our project. We need to think about how we will not let anyone on the side of the road, because the current drama is this one. This is the addition of three issues. Migration. We can say what we want about migration, but that creates populism. You have seen the results in the Netherlands, and you will see the results in the regional elections in Germany next year. Second, climate change, which is also key. It requires from us very important decisions that will change the life of all citizens. We're not talking about rocket science here. This is real life. How do we drive? Where do we go? How do we build? And then there are an increasing number of people that find themselves in precarious situations. Then you add up those three and you have the big issue, and the European solutions need to come fast. Thank you. Just to pick up on what you just said and the stakes regarding enlargement and the relationship that you create with the institutional outcomes and stakes, I'm going to ask a question to Charles Goerens. Charles Goerens is a deputy chair of the AFCO at the European Parliament. This committee presented a report last week in the plenary session regarding the situation and the state of affairs of the European Union, with, of course, that question of the enlargement. How did the debates go? What can we expect from those debates? Can we expect something from the report and its implementation in the coming years? Thank you. The European Council will have to make a decision on that report. I wanted to have a bigger majority. Not even 50% of the votes were in favor in the European Parliament. So the European Parliament is going, and this being said very humbly, in the wrong direction. The discussions that prevailed and that took place before this report were the following, and I'm not going to say anything that will come as a surprise. First, in a term, in a legislature for the European Parliament, within all the European Parliament, within all the European countries, you have at least one election in each country, so 27 plus 1, 28. Those 28 elections are very important, but there is one that is even more, the United States, the elections in the United States. These elections are going to be key and decisive. We know that there is one election period once every 4 years. And we also know that in the political landscape in the United States, some people say, we do not like the European Union. We know it. Do we need to be afraid of Mr. Trump? No, we need to be afraid of ourselves. We are seeing a Europe that is still looking for its trajectory and its pathway. We can say whatever we want about Europe, but if we compare Europe to the United States, then we have to admit that separations and divisions are not bigger in Europe than they are in the United States. The political landscape is divided, is fragmented in the United States. And you have the same situation in Europe. But the Americans are supportive of their country. They're Democrats, they're Republicans, they all support their own country. In Europe, that is different. Poland is more in favor of NATO than Europe. Then you have Hungary, then you have Slovakia that is looking for its own way, which is not the one of Europe. All those countries are weakening us or strengthening the fifth pillar of Mr. Putin. This is something that we can overcome. Had we paid more attention to the institutional issues that we're facing. Our issues are first in nature institutional. We are divided on different topics, but in the end, it will be about a majority voting in favor of one option. And if you depend on that majority, then you can't do anything. If Biden had to wait for the support of the governor of Texas or Ohio just to make a decision, it wouldn't do anything. So this is absurd. This is what we have in Europe. We want a more open Europe. We want a Europe that is not presented on a silver platter. We want an autonomous Europe. We want a Europe that is self-confident, and I would like to pay tribute to the political staff of this last 5 years, that made a lot to make Europe progress in the right direction. The big achievements that we can shed light on during this term is the way we manage the different crises. When Europe is in times of crisis, it works very well. It has very good habits, and as soon as the situation comes back to normal, then issues and problems emerge back again. When we are in a situation such as the one that we know, we cannot underestimate the need to carry out a few changes in terms of the institutions. And I would like to pick up what Mr. Lambertz said. Enlarging the European Union is a good and I'm nevertheless also surprised of the promises that we made to different countries. If we had to work 35 countries, 35 ministers, 35 representatives in the various committees, that will be the end of the parliament, and that will be very difficult. I come from a country where the number of members of parliament is topped at 60, because we will not be able to govern any political entity with 4 parliaments. Europe does not have the capacity of absorbing all those new countries. Of course, the criteria of Copenhagen are very well. We can suggest those criteria to the candidate countries, to the countries that want to become members. This is a good thing, but then they also need to respect those criteria when they entered, and this is where the crux of the matters lie. We had this situation in the past, and we saw that it was not sufficient. In terms of positioning of the stance of the European Union in the world, you were talking about the institutional composition. We're talking about the capacity that Europe has to act. Over the last 24 months, we learned that China had become a European power. Peace is going through China and Europe. Where stands Europe? Who needs Europe now? And I'm going to make a little secret here. In order to conclude, I did not vote on the last two resolutions before 7th October with what happened in Israel, because I asked people who came to me saying, what do you expect from the European Parliament? And the answer was not good. They are expecting from the European Parliament, from the European Union, to be a good trade partner, but not to be a good political partner. So we need to take a position that makes us indispensable on the world stage. We do represent something, we do have a model that we can export. And the very last word, if you allow, on the difference that is between the real state and the political state. I very often say to my colleagues after a meeting, after using so many acronyms that nobody knows about, as soon as we go on Place Luxembourg Square in front of the European Parliament, no one understands us. This is also something that we need to pay attention to. We need to be able to explain what's important, what is at stake for Europe. And what's frightening in here is that over the last 3 months we had two very difficult debates on climate change and biodiversity, where the European Parliament was very divided because it is badly explained, because we were not able to make a decision for soda ash about pesticides, and this cleavage, this strengthening of positions within the European Parliament is unprecedented. Until very recently, people were asking, what can we do? Where is the compromise? We're able to overcome separations and divisions with everyone except for the far right, but everyone was willing to find a compromise. And this is a culture that we're lacking today, because in this culture we still had a certain autonomy. This is something that we need to keep. Then of course we can talk about the future of the institutions. Had we maintained this mindset, the debates on the necessity to change the treaties would have been totally different from the result that we saw last week.
Question to Niklas, Nienaß. We've talked already a lot about institutions, capacity to act of the EU, and not much about the citizens yet. And you co-authored, I think, a report on citizenship and democracy and the parliament. So looking at the future, at the discussions, well, first at the resolution from last week, and secondly at the discussions about EU reforms in the next years, do you think the citizens are taken into account enough? I can guess the answer, which is good. Looking at what you wrote in your report, what is in last week's report, and the reluctance of the member states to engage into this kind of discussion, are you optimist for the next mandate? And what follow-up to the conference on the future of Europe can we expect reasonably in the years to come?
So first of all, I want to come back to a lot of problems that have been noted here, and I think this is all right? We have a lot of issues when we look ahead, and for me, the major outcome is not so much, to be quite honest, about how we solve them. They need to be solved, full stop. But it's not what precise numbers we write down, what majorities we find here and there. The question is, how do we deal as Europe with them, and how do we work as Europe with them? Because I think all of them have shown that the problems that we are facing as society today are so big that no one single member state can solve them alone. This is true for the question of climate change. It is true for the question of biodiversity loss, of food production, but also, of course, on the wars in the world and the question of stability in the world as a whole. So the need and the urge for Europe is rising. And I think this is something that, at least in this round, people have been understanding more than maybe in the Council. Because in my understanding, in the Council, too many people fight for their own power, while I see us a little bit more fighting for the power of European people. At least this is what I want to do. I think it is of no benefit if the president or the prime minister of Hungary has a veto to everything or not, when it comes to the relation whether China or Russia or even the United States influence the life of citizens in Europe. I think the people of Europe have more interest in the latter one than the first one. When it comes to how to solve these issues, or how to introduce more possibilities to work together, I think I disagree with you here in several points, but this is fine. Because I think on the one hand, it's, if we don't find a majority for something, then the one side of parliament says, see, this parliament is not doing anything and we cannot show this to the people. On the other hand, I hear a lot of people saying, if they have a compromise for everything, then why do we have even, different political parties? Why are they not fighting anymore for my subject? So I think the truth lies in between, and the beauty of the political game is also to have changing majorities and to figure out what is best for the people within this regard. But overall, the thing is, and this is also comes to the question of populism, I need to insert that I think that the situation with migration is not a problem. It is a chance in disguise. The problem that we have is how we treat the people, because a lot of people who follow a populistic narrative always say they don't learn the language, they don't work. And the people coming here say the first thing they want to do is learn the language and find a place to work. And our policy is not allowing them to learn the language and find a place to work. So obviously we're doing wrong politics for the people, not how to stop them entering the country. And this is going more for populism. However, another part that benefits populism, if you look into the studies, you'll find that people always turn populistic if they have the feeling that no matter what they choose on different democratic levels, it doesn't change anything for them. And this is partially true, right? We have so many different limitations. For example, when we have laws made in the EU, they influence very directly what the member states can do with it, or even what the councils on the local level can do with that. And so if people run there for office, ask for something to be done, and then realize there's a law from the EU side or even from the UN side avoiding that, this is hurting them. And then they feel politics, democracy as a whole is not working for me anymore. Then I'll vote for those people who want to get rid of democracy at all. Why not, right? And this is, I think, the big fundamental problem that we have. We need to increase the possibilities for the EU level, for us to challenge and defeat all these problems that arise. But at the same time, we must make sure that the people on the local level and in their everyday life realize that democracy is working for them. And democracy, in a time, our democracy that we have right now, and this is now where I'm getting to the report, the democracy that we have right now is over 100 years old. In a time where we didn't have the internet, where you didn't even have fax machines, where you didn't have a fast communication, where you didn't have the possibility to end up in a different country every day, basically. Now, this story of Robert Schuman's granddad who changed nationality 3 times in his life. Nowadays, citizens travel through 3 or 4 countries within a week. They study in the first one, they live in another for their traineeship, they go for the 3rd country to find their love there, right? So they feel more and more European and they want to get involved in politics. What possibilities does politics allow them to do? If you're not locally stationed, little to none. Because if you don't stay in your country for 5 years, you cannot do politics properly. But they need to be engaged. They need to have the possibilities to engage in politics wherever they are. So that's the first thing that we made sure, to make sure that Europeans in Europe have possibilities to engage in politics in the local, regional, and national level. I had a lot of people from Italy living in Bavaria saying, you know, I've been living here for 15 years. I'm allowed to vote in the Italian elections. I have never seen their faces for 15 years, but I'm not allowed here to vote in the national elections, which are really, or regional elections, which are really relevant for me, because they decide what is the situation for the school of my children. So this is the first thing. The second one is also how to get to more concrete project-oriented democracy. And all of this comes together then also with the idea of saying, okay, we want to include citizens more in political and democratic understanding to make sure that they can also come to the Place Lux and understand what is going on when people are talking abbreviations. And one idea is then also to have the Agoras, where you have randomly selected citizens, like we did in the outcome of the, or in the conference on the future of Europe. So I want to end with one major point, and this is, of course, we need to reform the EU. Much needed, very much needed. But I remember 4.5 years ago, I was in a different locality here with a similar debate, also with Mr. Lambertz on the podium, talking about the same situation. And in between, or the solutions haven't changed, but the problems have arose. But we need to increase the possibilities of democracy, and we need to figure out that democracy, just as society as a whole, evolves, and give it freedom to evolvement. And if then, and now a little bit of a punch to left and right here, because of our friends from the PPE or the EPP are always thinking that everything stays stable if we just don't move, I'm sorry to tell you, this is not how the future and how changes work. We see a changing world, and we need changing answers to it, meaning also questioning how can we improve and better ourselves when it comes to democracy and participation in our society.
Thank you very much. I will give the floor to Eva Maydell just before leaving. Et je vais vous proposer de prendre une question de la salle.
And I will suggest that we take a question from the room for Eva Maydell. Does someone in the room wants to ask a question? So Eva can answer before moving on to the next part of the debate. Is there any question for Eva Maydell?
Maybe just a quick comment in case there's no question. I'm very happy to take it. First of all, once again, thank you for gathering, because I think it's very important for us to share the different opinions. In terms of how democracy should evolve and movement, whether it's from left and right, you also belong to one side. Don't think you're center necessarily. But I think there is a bigger picture here that goes beyond in which political party you sit in. And particularly when we talk about the capitals, be it Brussels or Strasbourg or Luxembourg, that most of the decisions are taken on an EU level. Sometimes it is about, indeed, from our perspective, the European interest, but it is also the broader picture, which I mentioned in the beginning. And it is our responsibility, if we want to move, not so much whether you represent a certain party, but it's more about making sure the national capitals are ready to make that step and bringing them on board. And I think regions have a very important role to play here, because I often do meet with mayors coming to the assembly at the Committee of the Regions, which, by the way, is taking place today and tomorrow as we speak. And you can see the eagerness that they have and the pro-European agenda that they put. But it would be awesome if we can translate that in some, and in most actually, of the national capitals, that they're able to see beyond their national borders and put Europe interests first. In the same time, I also do believe that we sitting in those three capitals taking the decisions on an EU level, we also need to sober up and understand the actual and real issues that citizens care about. Because some of the issues that we discuss, they're very noble and very important. I do take part in some of them as working on major files in the European Parliament, but they are not instrumental today for the citizens. And so sometimes we also need to understand what it is that citizens care the most and represent those views. So it's a number of things, as colleagues have mentioned, but I would like to once again thank you for giving me the opportunity to take part in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions peut-être pour vous?
Would anyone like to ask a question to kickstart the Q&A? Perhaps we have a microphone in the room which we could pass around. Thank you. One of the major work strands of this mandate was the Green Deal. And now when we think of the next mandate, we wonder about the future of the Green Deal, which was very much debated at local level, at European level. We wonder whether we should accelerate it, slow it down. So what is your opinion about this? And I'd like to have your view from the university about this as well. What about the future of the Green Deal? Thank you very much. Who would like to take the floor to answer? Please go ahead, Niklas. Nienaß.
I'm not
French or in English.
I'll do it in English. Otherwise, you will just have your ears bleed. So I think that the Green Deal is a necessity, and it is required to fulfill our commitments that we have for the Paris Climate Agreement anyway, but also a necessity just to survive. I mean, depends. Some lawyers prefer law over living, so I think this is important for them as well. But we need to work on this, and currently we are not on track to meet the fulfillment of the 2050 targets. To make not the 2050 of targets, but of the Paris Climate Agreement, which says that we are climate neutral on the global scale by 2050. And the Green Deal only foresees Europe as a continent being climate neutral by 2050, whereas the Paris Climate Agreement says that industrial nations need to be have to solve that earlier. So we need to advance it, and at the same time, I see that a lot of politicians are trying to reduce the speed that we're going ahead, and they argument from a competitiveness standpoint, which I absolutely do not understand, because at the same time we see as Joe Biden is using the IRA to speed up the development of technologies in the field of net zero industries. I think we need to advance it much faster if we want to compete with the US. If Europe wants to have a play in the industries of the future, we must act now and as fast as possible. But we should not stop there. I think that the question of what do we produce in Europe in the future is not one to just be answered for the next 20 years. I would prefer if we think about what do we want Europe to become within the next century. Because the thing is, while at the moment we're quite wealthy, we're quite rich, we have a lot of resources bound in industry, knowledge, and a lot of, the main resource that we have is knowledge, is human capital. We see that other emerging powers, China with 1.2 billion citizens, India with over 1 billion citizens, just went to the moon, by the way, in comparison to Europe. The African states are growing faster than ever before. So there are competitors to our wealth. And the question that we need to answer is, what is the resource that Europe brings to the global scale within the next 100 years to make sure that the wealth that we create right now is not just there for the current generation, but also for the next generations. And this investments I want to see from sophisticated politicians that don't just think for the next newspaper next week and making sure that their name is in there, but I want politicians that think for the history book in 100 years.
Goerens.
I'd like to start my speech with a quote from Jean-Claude Juncker, my fellow citizen. He said more than once, we know what to do, we just don't do it. Why don't we do it? Well, I'd like to come back to the importance of the institutional system. We make decisions, and very often these are misunderstood by our citizens. Let's take the nature restoration law. I talked about this to my Luxembourg farmer friends, and they didn't understand the system. I told them that Timmermans suggests that €1 invested in the NRL will bring a return of €7. And the farmers told me, well, why don't you just ask Timmermans to invest his money in the nature restoration law? If it's that profitable, if it really were the case, everybody would invest their money in the NRL. So why don't we do it? Well, I think there is a real issue when it comes to how the European level and the national level interact. I would like to try and combine these two spheres by giving you an example. When the President of the Commission sends to national instances a bill, a draft law, so that it can be reviewed for its compliance with the rule of proportionality, national parliamentarians either take a look or don't do anything. Usually, they don't do anything, although we're giving them the possibility to familiarize themselves with this text. National governments in each country should draft an explanatory note to send it to the Parliament, European Parliament, and this explanatory note should present the national challenges and the European challenges linked to this bill. The national parliament should also appoint a rapporteur, and the groups who do not have a rapporteur should appoint a shadow rapporteur. The same goes for the professional chambers that enter the legislative system. If we had such a system in place, the measures taken by the Brussels sphere would be better understood. It really makes me furious to see that we have political failures because things weren't explained properly. And we can explain things properly. Now, I agree with you, we can move faster, we have to move faster. However, if we try and proceed slower, we will be going a lot faster, like countries who do a really good job. Take Denmark, for example. Denmark has in its parliament a committee working on European affairs, and this committee is very well aware of what its government is doing in Brussels, and this is the parliament that ratifies all directives the fastest. What is no longer bearable is that people do not know what to expect. And I'll give you another secret. I spoke with one Minister of Culture. I talked to him about the impact of the nature restoration law on agriculture, and he had no clue. So this is the living proof that we could do better by better explaining to decision makers and citizens. Thank you very much. We also mentioned the role of universities in the green transition. How is the University of Lorraine acting on these issues? Because as an institution, I believe you're also faced with ecological and energy-related challenges. So how is the world of academia adapting to this green transition? Answer. Indeed, all universities in France are faced with these European challenges, not just our universities, and most universities in Europe, by the way. We are faced with technological challenges, and to overcome these challenges, we need investments and strategies to accelerate our efforts, which cannot work at national level on a scale from 1 to 40 when it comes to what France can invest at national level on hydrogen compared to what China can invest. So France would be on level 1, China would be on level 40. And if I draw a parallel with artificial intelligence, which was mentioned earlier on by the Commissioner, this begs the question of the European economic structures and economic players in Europe. One of the reasons why we were outstripped when it comes to AI, it's not because we have bad researchers. We have very good researchers when it comes to AI in Europe. But the US started focusing on this issue, China as well, with private players who are able to invest massively to scale up this technology. So first, we have the public powers which need to accelerate their efforts at European level on one hand, and on the other hand, the private sector that invests massively to industrialize this technology. Now, this might seem like a very technologized, so to speak, answer to a question that involves many various dimensions, but I think everyone would agree to say that the fight against climate change cannot be done only thanks to technology. There needs to be a true revolution within society. Now, I'm not speaking as president of university, although a little bit, because I do work with a lot of students at my university. But basically, what I want to say is that at some point, we're going to have to build a new sort of utopia. We need to build the society we want to build together, because if you count on the younger people to vote, it's important to talk to them, to understand their reality and their challenges. We need to give them a society that they can build and in which they will feel safe. Thank you. Karl, on this question, would you like to answer? Well, yes, we are faced with fundamental challenges such as the fight against climate change. And I think we can be successful if we tackle this challenge in an efficient manner at European level, at least at European level. And we have made quite some strides. We've made a number of brave decisions, and we've seen how things can get complicated when you want to work in a concrete manners. And the nature restoration law is a shining example of this. And we hear an increasing number of people saying, for example, as the Belgian Prime Minister said, because he's from my country, he said, well, perhaps we should take a break. And then people start to notice that all this has major consequences on the industrial situation. For example, if you take electric cars, it seemed that we missed the wagon, or at least we've been outstripped by far by the Chinese. Take Volkswagen, for example, which invested heavily in China, and within a few years, it's slowly being pushed out. And we could add on top of that the issue of digitalization and AI. It is indeed true, we have a lot of delay, although we do have the capability to perform better. But to perform better, we need to work hand in hand. We need to be at the forefront of these technologies. However, that being said, let's not forget to ensure that everyone is taken on board. I'm thinking, for example, on the law on renovating buildings in Germany. It's a chaos. It's absolute chaos. It's based on European legislation, but we did notice that this was important for people's everyday lives. It's important to be able to convince people, to involve them, and to be organized in such a way that the transition we have to make is affordable, because sometimes there is a lack of purchasing power. And there is one aspect I would also like to address. We are facing major challenges when it comes to investments, and we can take inspiration from what is happening in the US and elsewhere.
In digitalization, innovation, climate change. But when we take the budgetary rules, first in Europe, we want to change the world with a budget that is 1% of the European GDP, 2% of public expenditures. That is ridiculous. Second, we do impose rules in terms of public accountability and in terms of cohesion criteria, deficit, and capacity of indebtedness. That put states back to the wall. The German schools are very similar to Belgian schools, and that is not a compliment. We're not investing, and the Germans are living it very difficultly. This is, well, I would even say that they should understand. I talked about it with my colleague back in the days. In 2010 with the finance minister, the German finance minister, and that already was a discussion back then. To have a system where the state does not make any difference between current expenditures and future expenditures can only be a bad decision. If you do not have the financial mechanisms, if you do not have the financial tools to go forward hand in hand with your private partners, with your public partners, you will not make it. You will always lag behind, and you will see that you're not ready and that some are quicker than you. I will suggest to Ann Sander that she comes on stage for the conclusion. I will give you just a couple of minutes to react to the answer to what was said, Goerens. Yes, on digitalization, we're not the first to invent new products in terms of AI. Where we are efficient, nonetheless, is in drafting the rules, framing AI or digitalization. The Digital Services Act, for instance. We are the only one in Europe to have created a European standard that I hope to see becoming a universal standard. And we have to also pay tribute to those who put forward those drafts and those laws which entered into force. This is a major victory, and this is a very good way to counter-attack the stupid comments that we can see on the digital platform. Everything that is prohibited in the real life should also be prohibited in the digital life. So some things are working. We could have discussed for one more hour, but now we're going to give the floor to Ann Sander for concluding remark.